it's all the three Ds are happening simultaneously. Like you're always discovering new people, you're always developing some people, and you're always deploying some people. Sometimes that's the same person, right? All in the same, and it can happen very quickly. So I think that's a good way to look at it. It's not three stages, it's three simultaneous emphases that you're doing throughout your ministry.
Welcome to the For the Harvest podcast. I'm Paul Worcester with my co-hosts John and David Worcester, and today we're digging into a topic that's really close to our hearts. It may be one of the most important topics. I think we say that all the time. But this one really is important, is discovering, developing, and deploying harvesters for the harvest, from the harvest, for the harvest. And so before we jump into that, like the nuts and bolts of that, there's an acronym that we adopted and adapted from our friend Steve Shadrach. It's called FAITH, and it's faithful, someone that's really going to do what they say they're going to do; available, someone who has the time to be trained and mentored; initiative, takes action without people pushing them or giving them prizes; teachable, someone that can receive correction, someone that's aggressively teachable; and then heart for God and people, most importantly, heart for the lost, someone that has a burning passion for reaching non-Christians. And actually, if you don't have that last piece, it's very unlikely that they will be able to go out and start new ministries, start new churches, and reach lost people, because often that's the one that is missed, really. So as we talk about this discover, develop, and deploy idea, let's keep that faith acrostic in the back of our minds: faithful, available, initiative, teachable, and heart for God and people. Most importantly, heart for the lost. And let's use that as a filter for this conversation. So let's start like we kind of always do. How did Jesus discover the people he invested in? And what was he actually looking for in those men, especially the apostles he was going to raise up?
Well, I think one of the things that I like to use is taking a case study example like Andrew. And next question, what did Jesus see in Andrew? Why did he end up selecting him to get on his team? And the first thing is that he's the one that started taking steps. He was already a John the Baptist follower, but he's the one that started taking steps towards finding out more what Jesus wanted, was willing to, was available. He had to come over to his house, listen, he was teachable, learned about Jesus being the Messiah. And then the key thing is that right after he found that out, the first thing he did is went and got his brother. So that shows initiative. He wasn't asked to do that. He just sort of ran and did it as a natural overflow of just his excitement of and that's always a great sign for somebody who's got some evangelistic, apostolic kind of emphasis in his life. And so I would say someone like Andrew is a great example of that.
That's good. Yeah, and you look at that story, and those guys, they were faithful already to, John the Baptist, and then they're also like available, like they're the ones that were seeking him out, initiative, asking him questions. Hey, Jesus, where are you staying? And
Yeah, right.
so um and I think it's good to look at the opposite of that question too. What didn't Jesus look for, right? He didn't look for the guys with the greatest resume, the ones that were at the top of the list. You think of it, it may be like the Apostle Paul was still alive in that time period. So he might have been the obvious choice at the beginning. Eventually Jesus got him. But there's people like that were like, at the top of the whatever the seminary equivalent was at the
Academic.
time, in the rabbis, the ones that were
Yeah.
already following the rabbis that knew the most of the Old Testament. He didn't choose any of those guys. He
Yeah.
chose the guys, yeah, with faith, the guys with
Yeah.
this teachability and this humility.
Hmm.
And it's also interesting to think like he got a tax collector, he got a zealot, he got some other guys that were like a variety of different types of people, which is
Hmm.
also interesting to think about. Like we're not just looking for one type of leader. We're looking for laborers. We're looking for people who yeah, just basically it doesn't it's not a one size fits all. We're like, oh, this is what the leader has to look like in order for us to develop them. So I think that's an important. keys to think through. What would you say about it, Paul?
Yeah, I have a question for Dad, maybe. Do you know how much time he had those guys following him around before he officially, spent all night in prayer and chose the 12? Do you know kind of like the timeline there, Dad?
Well, we don't know exactly. We do know that he took them on the trip in John 1 through 4. He took
Hmm.
them to the wedding, he took them down to Jerusalem, took them to the baptism, went back through Sychar. That was probably a 3 or 4 weeks at least. So it was a period of time. And then after that happened, he started his Galilean ministry, and pretty soon after that, he called the fishermen to become fishers of men. So that comes in Matthew 4, Mark 1, and Matthew 4. And then that, we don't know how long that was exactly, but it didn't sound like, from reading scripture, it didn't sound like that long. And then for a while, they were functioning as this fishers of men, uh, kind of a more full-time apprenticeship under Jesus, starting to follow him around, going to the villages and doing that. And then sometime after that, by Luke 6, he made the third sort of calling to them, and he spent all night in prayer. And then he named them apostles. And so now
Yeah.
that was the new. Then that, I would say, I don't know exactly, but I would say that's probably within the first year or so of
Mm-hmm.
his ministry that he got started with that.
Yeah. And that's still longer than probably most people with a natural reading would, just their normal reading of it would think. A lot of people would think, well, he just kind of called these guys out of the blue and
Oh yeah,
just didn't even know them, but he prayed all night and just selected them kind of through this mystical process, which he definitely did pray hard about it, and he knew human nature, and he had the Holy Spirit insight into everything. But also he knew these guys. If it was a year, there was also kind of this process of almost layers of getting to know them and seeing them in those situations. And so that's a principle I think we can apply from to our own ministries. It's helpful to have almost layers of leadership and kind of hoops, not hoops, but like challenges that we can see people rise to. Maybe you take them on a mission trip, or take them out evangelizing to 2 by 2 to do witnessing, and
exactly.
see the ones that really rise up in those occasions, or offer them to give them a little devotional to share during small group life group time, and
Right.
let them see how they do, and kind of like let them grow into business, not go into business right away.
Yeah, and I agree. I was thinking about that idea of like, in order for him to choose the 12, he had to have a bigger group of people to choose from, more than
Yeah.
the 12. And I think a lot of people, when they think about discipleship, they just get like the first person that's breathing, that is willing to have lunch with them. That's their selection process, basically, But it's helpful to have like a bigger funnel of people that you can
Yeah.
actually select from. And so that's where there's the genius of how Jesus did do like the larger group teaching. He had other people that were helping in various ways, like the women who were helping support him. He had other people like the 72 that was kind of his crew that would also come with him. And so he had this larger group of people that he was able to draw from. So he wasn't quote unquote stuck with, oh, this is just the person that I have. Like this is the best I have. We got to go with the best that we have, right? Like we
Yeah.
do still, but we're not Jesus,
Well,
But
the more you have to select from, the better chance
but
you have to
yeah,
find
my
somebody.
point is like it's helpful to have some type of a funnel that you can actually select from
Right. Exactly.
versus just only, oh, we're there's kind of like this big thing of like we're only gonna do discipleship. We're not doing the big funnel. We don't care about how many people we have. There's extremes on both ends, right? Like we need to
Yeah.
have some people a bigger net in order to find the few that are really going to make a difference. But again, I think there's this tension of, in my position of having a church, it's easy just to focus on that funnel and not focus on those few people. And then
Selecting.
there's
So
another
actually
extreme where
selecting
they're
some.
only focused on the few people, but they don't have a very good funnel.
Yep.
And so I believe the best is kind of having both. So yeah. Anyway, that's just the insight from that.
Something else I wanted to say about the timeline. I would say the just starting to be followers and going on the first short-term trip down to in the John 1 through 4. That was probably only a few weeks. And then my guess is that the biggest choice of whether they was when they became full-time followers, when they became fishers of men. And at that point, all the people we know of that he called to do that were the ones that went on the trip. And then we also know that he took them out on a fishing expedition for a day and watched how they reacted in real life situations, which is also something I like to do when I'm selecting somebody to be any kind of top leadership and put a lot of time into. I like to do something with them in real life. I like to play basketball with them or play a game of Catan with them or something like that. See how they act in real life rather than just how they act in church settings. So that's just something, a little assessment tip that I've used over the
Hmm.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the beautiful things about mission trips too. Mission trips, going to conferences, because
Yep.
you're in those settings where it's not like church mode that they're in. They you
Yeah.
can see them in multiple pressurized situations. It's a beautiful thing.
Right.
So
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
I will say one other thing about this whole thing and selecting them is that you just look, your bottom line, you're looking for people who take action, who do stuff. That's the initiative thing, with the Heart for the Lost, all that we've seen in the acrostic. But you want people who take action, who will obey whatever information they have. It's obedience-based discipleship. They have a little bit of information, they don't know much yet, but they do something with what they've got. And when you follow that light and you do with what you've got, then God gives you more light and He gives you more, and they can continue to progress, even though they're not doing it perfectly. But that's just a good principle to keep in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Another way to say that would be the people that respond to your invitations. They say yes, but they also have like a bias for action. Like they're not just the people that are just going to sit there and be like, "Well, I did what you told me to do." Like
Yeah.
I have one guy that I'm kind of mentoring right now, and he's always like coming up with these ideas of like, "Oh, how do we do this? We can do this, we can do this." I'm having to slow him down a little more than than I have to speed him up, but I love that. Like
Good.
and I think it was Harold Bullock from Gary Smith, the guy we just had on, quoted Harold that said I'd rather tame a stallion than beat a dead horse. That's what Harold said. And I think that's so much the case that so many people that we're trying to train are just like they're not really that hungry, they're not really that passionate to reach the lost, but you find one of those people that has that passion, that burden for the lost, then pour fuel on whatever fire's there, and that's the way to go. So,
Yeah, kind of a hot take, even on your assessment when you're playing basketball with the guys. You're not looking for the passive nice guy in those basketball settings. You're looking for a level of competition, or even in playing
Yeah.
settlers, you're not really looking for someone that's never going to cut off anybody. Or you know what I mean? You want a little bit of competition, a little bit of this testosterone going, especially for church planter type guys. I don't know. That's kind of a hot take, but obviously you want to be kind and respectful and have good character and loving people well. But also, we're not looking for passive kind of
yeah,
wimpy guys either. You
Right.
know what I
yeah,
mean?
I'll give you one example. We
I
we were
agree.
doing, with the basketball thing. We were doing an assessment, and this is a whole assessment couple of days, and we played basketball with the guys. And one of the guys we played basketball, he was sort of the top guy that was raising up as probably the best church planter of this whole group that we were doing. He's a youth minister, a very successful youth minister. But when we played basketball, we ended up finding out that he cheated
Mm,
in the game. And so that
wow.
was a character flaw. And so we confronted him about that. We talked to him about it and stuff like that. And he also did something else where he talked really mean about his wife sometime in front of everybody. And so we could have, and he said, oh, no. And then so we didn't pass him in the assessment. We said, no, we don't think this is going to be for a church planter kind of
Hmm.
salary kind of position. And we said, and he said, oh, no, I'm all right. And he went ahead and planted without our consent. But guess what happened 6 months later? He lost his wife, lost his whole ministry, whole thing
Wow.
fell apart. Character was one of the things you want to assess for, and
Mm,
Yes,
higher level leadership kind of things,
mm,
particularly.
it's
mm.
good.
So that would fit under the maybe faithful category. Like he just
Yeah.
he didn't have the character.
Yep.
Uh, yeah.
And
Mhm.
teachable too, probably.
And not very teachable.
Yeah.
He had a lot of charisma. He had a lot of gifts, but he didn't have the stuff that God's really looking for, I don't think.
Mm.
So when we're in this day-to-day ministry, like if you're leading a life group or you're leading a small church or whatever size church, what are some ways to kind of like on your radar again, like what would maybe be some specific things that you would look for in a leader that you're trying to develop? What would be like some things like, oh, that's something to flag that, you know,
Mm.
some ideas, some things to look for.
Mhm.
You
I can
thinking
think of one off the bat
yeah,
is
yeah,
someone who asks questions.
yeah, you go. I
So
like
that's
that.
a really like, when they ask, okay, why are you doing it this way? Or even just asking you questions, follow up on your sermon, like they're
Right.
thinking a little bit deeper about whatever it is that you're offering them. I think that's a really good sign of a potential leader, someone who's teachable.
That's
Yeah.
huge. Even
Yeah, I
Jesus
have a guy.
for
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I have a guy like that in our discipleship school right now, and he's really raw, like a new believer. But he's like, we're going out. We do an hour of evangelism on campus, and he's coming back like, why are we only doing an hour? Like, we should do more. And I'm kind of like, hey, we feel free to go do more on your own time. We have some free time, go do more. But at the same time, that's in the back of my mind. I'm like, hey, that's a good sign.
That's a really good sign.
Not only is he wanting to do more evangelism, he's also asking questions and he's processing why we're doing what we're doing, and stuff like that. And so there's a few rough edges that need to be worked out, and that kind of go with some of those strengths also have weaknesses where someone that's always asking questions, and if they do it in the wrong way, it can come across kind of
Too big.
unteachable, and there could be an arrogance there. But at the same time, we don't want to just have this kind of like yes man mentality with the people around us. We want to be confident enough in our own leadership that we're able to have these kind of young bucks all around us that are pushing up against things and asking questions and kind of pushing on things a little bit, because then they're going to be able to go do great things for the kingdom.
Hmm.
I'd say that. Yeah, I would agree, really agree with that. And I think the other thing you want to test them with is you want to test them with maybe it's a small thing to start with, but some kind of correction. Some type of see how they respond to you when you say, "Hey, I think you could do this a little better if you did it this way." Or afterwards, you're just talking to after the meeting, you're just talking with your best friends. Maybe you ought to go and meet some of the new people that are there instead of just talking to your best friends after the service. Just whatever the situation is, and how they respond to that defensively
Mm.
or they're teachable. They really want to get better, and that's another key
Hmm.
characteristic that I'm looking for. That's that
Hmm.
teachability thing.
Another thing that I look for is actually the I debated on initiative and changing it to the word influence
Mhm.
because that's another thing that I think is a good, especially if you're looking for a leader. Like you can call it like the Pied Piper effect.
Yeah.
It's like when they go to lunch, when after church, when everyone's like deciding on where to go to lunch, if they decide, hey, we're going to Chili's, and everyone goes to Chili's, that's like kind of the Pied Piper effect that like what
Yeah.
they do, other people follow, other people naturally follow. In general, you want to develop people who at least have the potential of being people like they're good, they have good relational skills, they are able to connect with people well. So that's one of those kind of, it's not necessarily on the faith acronym, but it's one of those things that's I think really important with ministry is their ability to win others over, and just they're naturally a influencer of other people. I think is really important. So
Mhm.
Leaders lead.
Yes.
When you become a leader, is anybody following them?
hmm.
Just want to look at that. Andrew again was that he was able to get his older brother, I think his older brother Peter, to actually come with him to come
Yeah.
and see the Messiah. So he showed leadership in that situation.
Yeah. And that looks different for different people. So again,
Sure.
that's going back to the different
For sure.
shape of different people. But yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
Okay, so let's keep the focus on Jesus. That's always a safe place to be. How did Jesus actually develop the 12, and what was his primary methods that he used in that development? We're moving to the develop stage
Yeah.
now.
We got him selected, and now we're developing him. How
Yep.
do you begin to do that? The first thing he did, he started taking them on trips. He took them to the wedding. He took them down to Jerusalem. So I think that's huge. He took them on some short-term trips, and interacted with them on the way, modeled some things, showed them some things. I think that's huge. And along with that, going along with that is that implies that it was on the job training. It wasn't
Yes.
training in a classroom. It was actually training by going out doing. And Jesus was doing something. They were watching him, and they were learning how to do that. And that's huge. And it was also relational. The trip is relational. The ministry together, the other, there was a personal relationship Jesus was developing with them and developing that closeness. So
Mhm.
on the job training and relational,
Yeah. I was
actual apprenticeship.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of the different stories that he also involved them in what he was doing. So it wasn't just like, hey, you come and you watch me do this. Like in John, at the end of John 3, it says that his disciples were actually the ones that were baptizing people, or I
Right.
forget, it's at the beginning or end of whatever, John 4.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
in that season,
Yeah.
in
Right.
that time. And you look at even the story of the feeding of the 5,000, like he tells Philip, all right, how are we going to feed all these people? And so
Yep.
he's
Yep.
getting them involved, even not
Mhm.
just in telling them directly what to do, but like, all right, what do we do? What do we do in this situation?
Make
Getting
them
them
think.
like thinking critically about the situations that they're in.
Yeah.
So it's not just telling them what to think, but how to think, how to be a leader.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of situations, I think, again, where he sends them out and then they debrief and they talk about what they did. So as much as you can like involve people, not just in the, hey, I need some people to delegate to, deladump, but I need you to think through how would you lead this ministry if you were the one leading it? How would you navigate like this life group situation where there's someone dominating the conversation? How would you do that? And like you help them become self-sustaining leaders. And I think you did that for us, Dad, where you would ask us a question and you would not tell us the answer until we guessed it right.
Yeah,
Basically,
yeah,
it was kind of annoying, but it was very effective, because
Especially on road trips. Sometimes we'd
yeah,
go a couple hours on one question. It seemed
yeah.
like.
So it forces you to be like not just settle for like, all right, what's the easy answer, the quick answer, but to really think critically. So I think that's one of the things that Jesus did in that apprenticeship stage.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think the word empowering comes to mind is like the sooner we can get someone actually doing the stuff, the better. Like
Yeah.
within the first months of and really them having real um ownership over whatever we're training them up to do as soon as possible. I think most ministries are way too slow about empowering people to do actual hands-on ministry. And a couple theories on that is one reason is a lot of pastors and church leaders aren't doing that much hands-on ministry themselves. They're kind of so they're having a hard time modeling it because they're just hanging out in their office writing sermons or leading meetings with their staff, but they're
Yep.
not in the trenches themselves, and so it's going to be hard to reproduce what you're not doing. The other thing is they have this elevated over elevated view of what it takes to lead a group or to disciple someone else. Or we talk about this a lot, but we can't say it enough, is really we believe in one step ahead leadership. If someone is one step ahead and they have a good coaching relationship with someone above them, they can really help someone else and be on the front lines. And so that I think that is huge, is letting people be a little bit in over their heads almost always. And I think that's how the Lord grows us as individuals. That's all of us. That's kind of our story, is God constantly put us in situations where we felt a little bit in over our heads so that we could depend on him and grow our leadership, grow our problem solving skills, and grow our capacity. And kind of like how you teach a kid to swim. When I taught my kids how to swim, I would be halfway through the pool, like this tiny little pool, and I would just get Evelyn when she was 3 years old to swim to me. And I said, "Hey, good job, Evelyn. Now swim back to the wall. Now I'm going to go a little further." And each
Yep.
time you just
Right.
go a little further. And so that's kind of how we want to be. We want to keep pressing them and pushing them to not like abandon them, just throw them into the deep end, but we want to like help them and challenge them and really help young leaders grow their capacity, not just for ministry skills, but leadership, problem solving skills, time management. I call it the principle of the plate. Have I shared that with on the podcast yet?
I don't
So
remember.
you have what's on your plate and it feels full. A young 20-year-old guy, I work with a lot of young guys that are in ministry, and they feel like their plate is completely maxed out. And I say, yeah, it is. You got to you got to be faithful. Luke 16:10, one who is faithful in very little will also be faithful in much. And so if you're faithful with what's on your plate now, the reward of being faithful with a small plate is God gives you a bigger plate. And then over time, he grows your plate. And that's a good perspective thing because people think burnout is like the most treacherous thing ever. When really, yes, it's true. Burnout is a real danger there. But I think what sometimes people what they mistake burnout for, God's just expanding your capacity. God's helping you grow your problem solving skills. God wants you to learn how to maximize your time better, how to delegate better, how to lead with more wisdom. And so that often it's just a young person's not experiencing genuine burnout. It's they need to grow their capacity. So that's a very actually that is a very important conversation we need to have with young people. And we need to do it in a pastoral, loving way and not just blast them, make them feel guilty, just buck up, bud. You need to work harder. No, we need to be like, hey, I understand you feel this tension of being kind of your plate is full, but let's process and how you can problem solve this and how you can create a healthy rhythm where you are taking rest, you are living an abundant life and abiding in Christ, spending time with the Lord, and fulfilling all the ministry and life responsibilities that God has for you. Because ultimately,
Mhm.
I want to help you become the best leader that God has for you. And even if it's a short-term season of pushing and growing your capacity, that's going to be worth it in the long run because you're going to be much more effective and healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that like for example, in that conversation, one of the ways that I would kind of approach it, the first obvious question, if they feel like, oh, my plate's full, is there anything on your plate that doesn't need to be there? And so
Right.
like, so the idea is like also leading with questions. And like we see Jesus doing that all the time where he would ask them a question rather than just giving them an answer. So when it comes to developing people, like that's another one of those principles. Why is that so effective? I know we already mentioned how Dad did that with us, but do you have any other thoughts on um, how to ask good questions, Dad, or like with the importance of that?
Oh, yeah. Hmm. I think it's really important, and I think you've already hit it pretty well. There was something else I did want to talk about, though, is that we're talking about the issue Paul's talking about. The
Hmm.
issue is a lot of times is in us as leaders. We just don't think they can do a good enough job at what they're doing. So we want to keep all of them straight under us rather than letting them go out and do the thing and give them their own some areas of ministry. And a thought I've had this week that I think has been helpful, maybe the last week, um, is just sort of a comparing it to homeschool versus public school.
Mm,
You might have a teacher who's more qualified, but he's teaching 30, 40 kids in the class versus a parent who is just teaching one or two kids his own. He
Hmm.
knows them and he's they got the relational skills and like that. Is that there's a real chance that even though he's not as good a teacher, that parent, because he's given their personal attention and he can do a better job. So some of our disciples can actually do a better job of discipling somebody because they're going to give somebody more time and friendship and help, and maybe being one step ahead is actually good for them rather than us trying to disciple them. We're 10 steps ahead maybe.
mhm,
And so that letting them try their wings out. I think there's something to this, and that the ratio of how many people. I think so often we want our church to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we got these hundreds of people, but pretty soon you get over 40 or 50 people, you're not having much of a relationship with very many of them, and
Hmm.
so but uh, if we're training all the parents, for instance, to really be discipling their children, and the people in the church discipling somebody or helping somebody, all of a sudden you're spreading the influence out a whole lot more. But that takes some security for us as leaders to be willing to give away.
Yeah.
That that
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
that
And the way
resonate?
I would summarize that would be like you just push down as much as you can as possible, as many
Yeah,
decisions, as much authority as you can
yeah,
down. That way you do only what only you can do, and
that's
then
right.
those people doing what only they can do, and it just keeps pushing down the authority
Yep.
in a healthy way. And
Yeah,
and I think that's again what we see in the movements in India and places like that is that
right.
uh,
That's
they
right.
don't they don't hold on and grasp the authority. They're pushing it down and trusting the people under them to take it to the next level. So I think that's a big part of development. But I also agree with you that you can't just like push the authority down and then leave them. You have to keep that relationship alive. So that I think that's the key element is that the
Right.
relationship, the relational thing has to be there because we've all started ministries and things like that. And sometimes you can just pass it off so much. And you're like, I'm going to go move on to the next thing. You don't keep that relational connection alive as much as you should, maybe. And then eventually they're like, oh, well, they're just going to do their own thing. They're not going to even come to you and ask you questions about what you're doing, And so there is
Right.
something to that too of like, how do you push down that authority without totally cutting off the relationship and just being like, all right, you guys just do your thing. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's a
you
whole
keep
nother question,
yeah,
but
that's a huge issue on this. So what I'm thinking you do is you keep the relationship with the leader, but you don't try to have the relationship with all the people that are his followers. And so
yeah,
it's all like more like Moses, Jethro, and Moses' whole principle. Moses doing all this, I got to do it myself. No, just get 50s and 10s and stuff like that. And when they have a problem, I'll keep in relationship with the people here, then they'll keep in relationship with people next ladder down, and they'll get next ladder down, and it kind of is a a way to keep it going. And so you keep some type of discipleship relationship going on with every leader, ongoing. But they're doing it with somebody else. But you just keep your number that you're trying to keep hold of yourself at a smaller number.
Yeah.
You know,
And at
spread
least
yourself too
everyone
thin.
is getting that leadership input. If you, as your movement or ministry grows, you personally won't be able to meet with all your leaders. Hopefully we'll get to that point where we
Yeah.
don't even have a personal relationship with all the leaders we have, but those leaders have
That's
leaders.
right.
And
That's my point. Yep, that's right.
that's ultimately the goal. I do think sometimes ministry leaders bottleneck it by thinking that they personally have to
Oh yeah,
um, and
that's right.
they get past 20, and it's hard to do that with more than 20. And so at that point, that's capped. So you even got to delegate the personal touch of a leader on leader, and get it like everything that's we're trying to be the hero maker, not the hero. We're trying to have our fruit grow on other people's trees. We're trying to get it beyond us
Yep,
and
that's right.
always pushing it to that level, basically. But it does have to start with us really modeling those type of rhythms and things like that. So I think
Mhm.
that's really important. So
Yeah, yeah.
okay, so how did Jesus deploy disciples, and what was the model that we see in the Gospels?
yeah. So we were kind of, I mean, already alluding to that, the
It was.
deploying,
Yeah.
but what he did was well, we see the two examples. The first example is the first time he deployed them and then they came back and they debriefed. So he did that before he fully sent them out. And but then the full deployment was after the 3 years, obviously after he was about to go back to heaven and he gave him the Great Commission. And he did leave him with the Holy Spirit. That was a very important thing that he left them
Yes,
with.
yes.
But he also gave them a lot of clarity on like what they're doing,
Yeah,
what they're sent to accomplish. Um, so I mean, like I guess he did a lot of his deployment work on the front end, where for those 3 years he was building in deeply into those 12 guys, and then they were ready to be sent out. So those are the first things that come to my mind.
And if you're going to talk about deployment, you can talk about levels of deployment. One thing is sending them all out, totally deployed. The other thing is he was deploying them within the first 3 or 4 weeks when he's letting them baptize. when he was
Yeah.
letting them organize the people at the feeding the 5,000, when he was giving them responsibilities and then watching how they did with that. So you've got these different levels of deployment that you're doing and different levels of accountability that you have with the people and those kind of things, and looking for different character qualities in the lives of the people and what their task is. I mean, I'll take a new Christian and I'll give them a lot of authority to go out and try to reach their non-Christian friends without having to go through a lot. I won't get them, I'm gonna send them out to reach their friends as soon as I can. And
Hmm.
I'll let them, and then they're teaching a few things wrong. Hopefully I got a relationship with them. I can help them to kind of get things straightened out. But I'd like to keep that going. Don't the thought there.
How about Paul? What lessons can we learn from the life of Paul in this idea of deploying and
Mm.
things like that?
Okay.
Yeah, I think the thing that came to mind with Paul is that he would sometimes be forced to leave before
Yeah.
he even really thought that they were fully ready. And so there was something like where he'd be kicked out of the city and they were just stuck with who they were. But he had this longing, he had this heart to go back. And when he couldn't go back, he would send a letter. And often he would also send his other guys, Timothy or Silas, to go back and just do what he could not do himself. And so even though there were situations where he could not be there, they still had his heart. He still like let them know how much he loved them. And then
Mm.
he would come back and he would be a part of appointing elders into those different situations. So even though he did deploy those churches relatively quickly, that he started, he would go back and he would help them with whatever that they needed, while still giving them like the ability to lead in their specific settings. So,
Hmm. And you think about Paul, he was more of a apostle. He was obviously Apostle Paul, but he practiced an apostolic version of church planting. So he would go start new churches, and his form of deployment was often leaving someone there and he would also take guys with him, and he'd keep his team going, and he would go start spin off lots of new churches. And so that's a biblical effective model that we'd love to see more of just more apostolic type people like Dad, who started multiple churches himself, getting new things going. And so that's a form of deployment. It's almost a lot of people when we talk about discover, develop, deploy, you're thinking about one church that's sending people out, like Antioch, which is great, biblical model. But also there's apostolic groups and teams that can be actively spinning off and starting new groups and then leaving people behind. So it's not an either or, it's a both and.
So you're deploying the lay elders in the church you're leaving behind. Maybe there's a
Hmm.
couple, two of them, three of them. You're letting them lead it. Maybe after only being there, I mean, for Paul, sometimes it was 4 or 5 weeks or a couple of
Right.
months, and he's already, and his new converts are being allowed to give at least temporary leadership to that new church that was being started. And then if it was too fast a situation, then what happened, that they couldn't be qualified as elders, officially elders yet, they were just temporary leaders, then Paul would come back, like in Acts 14:23, he'd come back and he would appoint elders in every church. After he finished his journey, he'd come back and then he would appoint the elders that now you could kind of test and see who's following them. He could test to see if the character qualities have come out and how the person's doing, and then he could appoint them at that point.
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah. And so we have the apostolic model, and then we have the more, I guess we can call it the settled model. And there's three examples of that in Acts is Jerusalem, Antioch, and Ephesus that we have a lot of color of kind of what that looked like. And specifically Ephesus, it says Paul would spend the day teaching at the school of Tyrannus, or however you say it. And
Oh,
people would come there from all over and they would get training. And then it says, because of that, the gospel went out all to Asia, which is Asia Minor, kind of that Turkey area. And so that was kind of a little bit of a different model. Like he was there for several years in Ephesus. He built that strong sending base that impacted that whole region through the people that were getting trained at that place. So, and then we also see Antioch sending people out, sending Paul, sending Barnabas out. Um, And in Jerusalem, it more happened actually kind of by accident because
Yeah.
there was persecution, and so they were all scattered out. But they had such a strong base there that even though they were sending people out, the church still thrived there as well.
Mhm.
I think that's a lot of people listening to this. Maybe they're in more of a settled church. They're not planning on moving to another church. You can still be very intentional about raising up leaders and sending them out. But one of the things that I wanted to ask was like a lot of people liked the idea of discipleship. They like the idea of developing people. But then at the end of the day, when it comes to the actual sending them out and deploying them, it doesn't always happen. So why do you think that is? What do you think's the biggest barrier to actually deploying people?
Mhm. Selfishness. The leader has finally raised up a good leader. He doesn't want to lose them. He wants to keep them there with him, make him his staff, and help him grow his ministry bigger, his basic base ministry. He wouldn't want to let good people go. Of course,
Yeah.
and that's the great way to stall out the kingdom. When the Holy Spirit tapped in Antioch, tapped Paul and Barnabas, he tapped some of the top people in the whole church, and they had to be
Yeah.
willing to let them go and lay hands on them and release them to go out and do
Mm.
that ministry. And I just think we just don't do that. We typically people are thinking selfishly. They're thinking about survival and success of their own ministry. They're not wanting to send people out. They're not thinking kingdom growth. They're thinking their own church growth. And usually
Yeah.
that's going back to the prevailing model, trying to get one church bigger and bigger. But either way, it can even be in a house church model or something like that. You don't want to let people go out and start their new things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times those type of leaders need a little bit of vision. They need a little bit of encouragement. They need us as the top level leaders to cast the vision, say, "Hey, we need to be on." Like for me, when I was in Chico, I was like weeping, saying, "We need to be on every campus in California." Because there's 280 campuses, and these are the statistics, and just like say, "Hey, this is." And we still have a lot of work to do in that on that side of things, but
Yeah.
we have seen guys since that call during those times, and now we have multiple ministries on different campuses and things. And so I think casting that vision, celebrating it, sending in that way is important. But also, I think in the same way that we don't deploy, or the one mistake we do in developing people is we have these unrealistic rules on what it takes to plant a church or what it takes to plant a new ministry. Like the church has to have a certain amount of financial health. Like we need to have our finances in order. We need to be a really super healthy church. Otherwise, if we send out a planter, we're gonna, reproduce unhealthiness. All those myths that Dad's so good about in his training. What are some other of those church planting myths?
Well, yeah, is money. There's three things. So, we're not ready to plant a church because we can't give them enough money. We can't. We're not big enough yet. We get bigger.
Mhm.
When I get to be over 500, or I get to over 1,000, or whatever, then I can start doing something. So it's either money, size, or like you say, health. But the point is that you could have a church that has 10 people going to it, a house church of 10 people. They can be a little dysfunctional. Okay, they have no money and they're small. They're a little dysfunctional the way they act, but you can still have the next Apostle Paul in that church that could be sent out to start a movement. So it's just the key is leadership. That's why they discover, develop, and deploy. The key is finding the right leader. If you find the right leader, he can raise the money. He can put together his team. He can develop a healthy ministry if you got the right leader. Everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
was thinking the idea of having a very clear, compelling, big vision. Obviously there's no vision bigger than the vision that Jesus gave us of making disciples of all nations.
Yeah,
That's a pretty big vision. But I think the problem is for most pastors, most leaders, their focus is on their castle, not God's kingdom. And at the end of
Mhm.
the day, we think, okay, well, how am I going to develop this ministry to get to whatever next level of ministry I am, reach whatever next growth barrier that I'm focused on. And we're not really thinking about the bigger picture about our city, our country,
Yep.
the impact of the world. And so I think there's a shift that has to happen from being kingdom focused to castle focused and focused on our little ministry. And so to me, I think that's the ultimate reason why we don't deploy as we should, because we're just, focused on our thing, and which in some ways we should be. We're stewards of our thing, but we also need to have a bigger vision of what's God's thing, what's the thing that God's doing, and have that open-handed mindset that even if there's someone who's going to do something bigger and better than us, even in our city, that we're willing to support that and love that and yeah, get behind that. So I think it's a powerful thing.
Yeah, and I think perfectionism is going to kill multiplication. Like thinking we have to have this certain leader that's checked every single one of these boxes off before we can send them out, or they need the success of a church plant is this, and this. I think some of those things are wise and good to kind of have some metrics and some ideas about what we're praying for and shooting for. So that's fine. But I think perfectionism kills spiritual multiplication because ministry is messy, right? And spiritual multiplication, especially, is messy. This kind of stuff we're talking about on this podcast, is going to be, it's not going to be perfect, neat, and tidy, but movement is never is, right? And
Hmm.
so we want to, when the, stable is empty, when there's no ox, there's no mess. I'm butchering the proverb, but the idea is like it's gonna be, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's so worth it if we're gonna get out there, and the Spirit is more than able to help imperfect people accomplish his purposes in the world. And the size of our vision should always reflect the size of our mission, not what we think is possible. Right? Like if we need to reach every person, like the people in our communities are lost and headed to an eternity without Christ. And there's unreached people groups that still have never heard the name of Jesus. And so there's no other option but to send when you think about it that way. Like the actual urgency of eternity, that's our mission. And so our vision needs to match our mission.
Exactly. Exactly.
Love it.
One of the things we're saying is that we've already said in this podcast quite a bit is that there is a close connection between developing and deploying. Actually, we develop people by deploying them. Current thing I'm doing right now is we're doing a life group in our church, and um, one of the things I'm doing, even though some of these people are really young Christians that are in this life group, I'm giving a lot away in the way we do the meeting. Even from the first week, I had like three different people do prayers for the thing. We had different people giving testimonies each week. We had different people participating. We got them involved. I mean, I did some teaching too, but because we're grounding them. But we you're developing them by deploying little bits of things, not just setting up the chairs. Now they did do that, and they did the food and all that kind of stuff, but they also did some upfront stuff that I'm bringing them along. And now I've got just in a few months, we've got several leaders that have surfaced now, and we're about to multiply this group, maybe in one or two
Mm.
different groups. And so it's that's part of what's the key there is that you're developing them through deploying them little by little in what we're trying to get accomplished.
That's
Yep.
great.
And I think one mistake that I've made in the past is even with these guys that are starting new ministries on different campuses, sometimes I am a little too big picture that it's months gone by before I've had a call with one of these guys that's on the front lines. And so I personally, that's just another piece of the puzzle. That's one thing the Apostle Paul did was he used every means available to strengthen and encourage those leaders on the front lines. And so you can
Yeah,
also go to kind of the other extreme of just, hey, let's spin off as many things as possible and not create the structures or the systems to support those new works to make
that's
sure
right.
they thrive. So I think there's kind of extremes on both ends, really.
Right. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
Good.
All right. Any last words before we wrap up? Any final words of encouragement to our listeners?
Yeah, I like that last emphasis of all the three Ds are happening simultaneously. Like you're always discovering new people. You're always developing some people and you're always deploying some people. Sometimes that's the same person, right? All in the same, and it can happen very quickly. So I think that's a good way to look at it. It's not three stages, it's three simultaneous emphases that you're doing throughout your ministry.
Hmm. Anything you'd add, Dad?
I think we've covered that pretty well. I think there's a lot there, but the whole, if you're going to multiply, we're going to fill the earth, we've got to discover, develop, and deploy leaders to do it. We've got to let people go to go
Hmm.
start their own things. Not everybody has to. I like to look at the church as sort of it's like a lake with a river running through it. It's like the Sea of Galilee. It's not a dead end, like the Dead Sea, but it's not just a river either. Not everybody that comes in is going to go out and leave and go out and start a new ministry. But there are some, and we should have a system running through the church that's helping to identify those people who we can develop to go out and start their own groups or churches or ministries. And so
Yeah.
we're constantly working on that leadership pipeline, that leadership river that's flowing through the ministry.
Yep. And you're baking that idea of praying for the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers
Yeah.
into his harvest. That's a daily prayer of ours. God, raise up more laborers in and through our own ministry to the ends of the earth. And so prayer is
Amen.
a huge piece of this puzzle. So, all right. Well, that's all we have today, friends. If you enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe, and maybe write a little review, share it around, text it to your friends, and then go back and check out some of our previous episodes. We went through a whole series on the Gospel of John that kind of looked more in depth about how Jesus started his ministry, and we've had some really fun episodes. So until next time, let us know how any one of us personally can come equip your leaders, and we're available to kind of do that sort of thing. So also just like stay in touch, and until next time, God bless.